Hey guys, all right, we are live for this week's YouTube or KiS Organics Q&A. Brandon will be joining us here really shortly. It was my fault. I was having trouble getting my computer to log in and get this thing started. So apologies for running late today, but excited to be here. And like I said, Brandon will be here shortly. Now, in the meantime, I just want to wish everyone a happy Christmas, Hanukkah, whatever holiday you celebrate. I know this is kind of a chaotic time of year, so I hope everyone's doing well through the holidays. Um, what I did want to start off, I did have a topic here while we're waiting for Brandon, and that was someone had commented on our previous live where we talked about removing root balls at the end of the growth cycle. So I just wanted to do maybe a little bit deeper conversation around that topic because I think it's interesting and I think that maybe there's some misunderstandings there too. So, do you need to remove your root ball at the end of the growth cycle? Absolutely not. You don't have to do it. Some people, I've seen people that will just cut the plant right at the base where it comes up out of the soil and then plant next to it. Steve Cantwell will actually do the bottomless pots, and he'll put the bottomless pot next to his previous bottomless pot, and that's another way that he does things so he doesn't have to disturb the soil. So the whole argument for not removing a root ball in a bed is that you're causing soil disturbance. And soil disturbance is bad because it's the same as tilling. And I would push back on that a little bit because there's actually there's a lot of good reasons I think for soil disturbance, and we have to remember again we're indoors in beds. We're not talking about running a mechanical tiller through our beds like we would outdoors. We don't have to worry about erosion. That's the biggest reason why tilling is so awful. Is it destroys soil structure, but more importantly it causes a massive amount of erosion because when that soil structure is damaged, wind comes through, water, and just removes our topsoil, which is so important for fertility and organic matter. So indoors, we don't have that as an issue. And by having a little bit of soil disturbance, we're adding oxygen into the soil, we're adding nutrients directly into where the plant needs it, which is right in the rhizosphere where the roots are going to be going for our next cycle. By disturbing the soil, we are removing any sort of density issue because over time we'll get compaction in the beds, and we want to break that up. And will also allows us to reincorporate aeration. So when like the pumice or perlite starts to float to the top of the bed, we can mix that back in to get a more homogeneous media. So those are the reasons, some of the reasons we like to re-amend. If you want to go a little deeper on it, there's something called I'm going to do this off the top of my head. I think it's the ecological disturbance hypothesis. And basically what they find is the highest apex of diversity in an ecological system, whether that's a jungle or a temperate forest, or in this case, a microbial community, is typically at a level where there is some level of disturbance. It's not where there's massive amounts of disturbance happening regularly. It's not where there's no disturbance, but it's where there is some level of disturbance. And you can read about it. I think there's a lot of resources around that. So based on all of that, based on my understanding of soil biology, we do think that optimally you are doing a little bit of soil disturbance. It gets the nutrients where they need to be. It, like I said, removes compaction. It corrects bulk density issues. And the other issues that we've mentioned in the past is it removes the highest concentrations of heavy metals from the soil, and it removes the highest concentration of viral and viroid load, and it removes the highest concentrations of any sort of other pathogens that might be in that plant. Because just because your plant doesn't show a pathogen issue doesn't mean that there isn't some level of it in your soil, in your environment, and then therefore in the roots itself. So over time, when people start to see what people talk about genetic degradation from cloning, a lot of scientists that I talk to say that's most likely not the genetics degrading, but it's rather a buildup over time of all these pathogens and other things in that get into the cellular structure of the plant itself, and those build up and concentrate over time. So these are all the reasons we think it's good to lower those thresholds by removing some of the root system. So I hope I better explained it, at the beginning of this call, and we can move on. All right, Brandon, really good to have you here. Nice to see you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you too. I need to fix my microphone so it's coming through here. But anything you want to share before we get going?
I had somebody reach out earlier today asking if we would talk about proper ID for insects. So they sent me a photo, and it was really grainy, and I couldn't tell. It just looked kind of like a blob. And so we talked about the need for really good, clear photos. I know you've talked a lot about how Suzanne will coach you to count the hairs on something's rear end to tell what it is, or cornicles on an aphid and that kind of stuff. And so that's the first step. And then they asked if there was a resource that we could point them to help them learn to ID. So of course I said to go to Suzanne Evans, the Bug Lady's website, and I've spent some time on her website, and she's got a host of really wonderful links to different websites and books and that kind of stuff. And then just finally, I told them that my favorite book was that Copper Knowing and Recognizing book, that really big one I have. And it's got the best photos and 3 pages of information on each insect, and it's phenomenal. So I promised them I would mention that, but that's it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good point. I've learned a lot in the last little bit from Suzanne. Even I sent her some pictures from my dino lights. I'm trying to pull them up as we speak here so I can share those with you guys to kind of give you an idea what I shared with her. And she basically said she can't tell what kind of thrips I have, and so she's making me mail them to her. They should arrive today. Actually, I got to follow up with her. She was excited though, because I wasn't aware. And again, this is me learning too, that there's different thrip species. Obviously, this one here I took with my Dino Light after running. I took a bud and I ran it. I stuck it on a coffee filter. That's the brown background. And then I ran alcohol over the top of it, and that kills everything in there. It kind of causes the thrips or whatever bug is in there to fall down onto the coffee filter. And then I was trying with my rapidly deteriorating near eyesight as I get older here to pick up the little thrips with a paintbrush and get them into vials. My wife had some old perfume samples that she had recently thrown out. So I was able to salvage those out of the garbage and put them in with alcohol into that, and then mail them to her. Cause you actually have to get them off the plant material, because the plant material degrades in there, turns everything green, and she says it makes it really hard. She's going to somehow manage to slide mount these guys and figure out exactly what they are, because I was telling her I have some Bavaria that I got from Brandon that he had. And I was going to apply that. And she's like, well, if they're echinothrips, that's not going to do you a lot of good. That's not going to kill them, because they pupate on the plant and not in the soil. So I guess the main thing that I want to share is just, it's complicated. This is not my area of expertise. I'm constantly learning myself. And so even Suzanne, looking at these photos, wasn't able to identify the species and be able to give me the best method for, combating them. She actually needs to look at them, slide mount them, and then can come back to me and tell me exactly what we're dealing with. So just to reiterate what you were saying. And these are high quality photos, I would think. And these were taken with a Dino Light, which I have.
Yeah, so I think that illustrates two great points, Tad. Is one, you had really good quality photos, compared to the super blurry phone pics that this grower was dealing with, and it's the best he had, and I've had to do that myself. There are some options like the little Carsons with the phone attachment so you can take, pictures directly on a microscope if you're out in the field. But I think it illustrates just how difficult it is to properly ID. And then the second point is, like you mentioned, the Bovaria, um, the SF nematodes, things like that, that we typically might use for thrips based on the proper ID. That, like that, those are expensive. Nematodes are expensive. Bovaria is expensive, and it would be wasted money if you've got the echinothrips. So I think those are just great points, and really kind of doubles down on why people need to properly ID. Because
Yeah. This one I'm showing here. So this one here at the time of purchase, I don't know what it is now, was like $150, $200. This is a particular, it's the like middle tier of Dynolite that we have on our website. It's expensive and they keep raising their prices. This I bought off of Amazon for like $30 at the time. Again, it's probably gone up since then, but very affordable. It connects via Bluetooth to your phone, and then that takes the pictures and sends it to your phone, and then you have them on your phone. The image quality is not as good, but what is nice about this one is because I have my phone on me, I can just connect it really easily. Whereas this one connects via USB, and unless you jump up to the wireless version, which is really expensive, you're going to have a laptop or an iPad or tablet, something to connect this to, which is a lot more of a hassle when you're in the grow itself. So
in the grow, these are my favorite. You can get like 2 of these for $30. They come with a little attachment. You can clip your phone to it. And, I've accidentally run them through the laundry. I've done all kinds of stuff with these things, and they're so cheap that if you break one, you're not going to be heartbroken. And then they're easy to use in the field. I love my Dynolite at the bench, though. You can't beat it.
See, I struggle with the one that you shared, and I actually prefer just a standard jeweler's loop over that,
Okay.
just for my eyes. And that's the thing. Everyone's going to be a little different. So I found the viewing thing on that tough for me to figure out. But yeah, awesome. All right, well, let's move on to some questions. Cannabis critic Jeff asks, I am growing with 8-year-old KiS biochar in 30-gallon pots. That's impressive, man. God, we've been doing this a long time now. People have 8-year-old soil. That's awesome. Please talk about the volume of containers you regularly use and how many of them you use prior to planting in a 30-gallon. So what would be the transition, Brandon, from veg to flower if you're going to flower in a 30-gallon pot?
So, like always, it depends. And you and I just had a really interesting conversation earlier this week with some growers, and we're focused on harvest metric, and they're tied to a calendar, or I thought they were. After we talked with them, we found out their veg side, they've got more flexibility, and so we said, well, let's do some bigger plants. And so it really depends on your space. So if
They were trying to increase their yield. So their yields were still lower than they wanted. That was the biggest, most important variable to them at the time. And I think that's just something to highlight.
Yeah, and that's for a lot of growers who are trying to get, up their yields and that sort of stuff. And so, so my answer is going to be different in a tent versus a room where you've got, you could go taller and that sort of thing. So, in a tent, let's say you've got a 4x4 tent, and you've got a 4x4 bed in there, or a 30-gallon pot in there. Either one of those, as long as you're doing 1 to 2 weeks of veg, 8 to 9 weeks of flower, you could do as a water only. And I would, for a 30-gallon, I would go from a bare rooted clone into, I've started, when I'm up potting, I'm getting a little more aggressive. I used to just strictly go 4-inch. I think it's just saves a step to go into a 6-inch, and I feel like I can do the irrigation pretty easily, as opposed to going into a gallon. And so I go 6-inch, then gallon, and then into that 30-gallon. And I wouldn't have no problem going into the 30-gallon straight out of the 6-inch once it gets kind of root bound or close to that in there, your roots and that kind of thing. But once I've got a good established root, I could go straight into the 30-gallon and manage that. But I think that because irrigation is so difficult to manage for folks, it's probably a good idea to go into that 1 gallon and then into the 30. or a bed.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to go straight into a 30 with a tiny, tiny plant without good root system. I think that's pretty challenging for people to water, especially new growers. If you're in a tent and you don't have a separate real veg space where you can really veg plant, so um, the whole one of the biggest reasons we want to use smaller containers is because we want to maximize the electrical costs that we have with our plants. So if we can fit 50 plants under one light because they're all in 4-inch or 6-inch containers versus four plants in 30-gallon pots, it's just inefficient. However, if you're only going to do 4 plants in your tent, or whatever number that is, and you only have one light and it's your veg and flower light in that tent, then you could go from a 6-inch into, like you said, into that 30. At that point, it should be okay to water. Otherwise, going up to a gallon is a good idea. Would it be helpful if we put together sort of a rough document around that with some timeframes for folks? I realize, like, as I say this, it would have to be pretty rough, but maybe it would help give some guidelines for people who just don't know even where to start on that end. I don't know.
Yeah.
Comment in the comments if that would be useful.
Yeah, I think it would be rough and exhaustive, because it would have to be, because we'd have to, we could do a couple. We could just do like 2 or 3. We could do one for a tent with an 8 or 9 week, then we could do one for a room with an 8 or 9 week, and then one for a long flower at an 8 or 9 week, or at 10 or 12 week.
Or going into beds versus going into
pots.
It's because, like, in the case with the grower we were talking to, they could veg longer, but they also were multi-tiered facilities, so they were vertical. So they had racks on top of racks, and so they had height limitations. The plants could only get so tall. So it's like, how do we maximize that canopy without getting up into the lights through proper training and genetics selection and planting density? Because when you're in a facility too, you don't have the time that the home grower does to really go around and prune everything perfectly all the time. You only get so much time per each plant, realistically, with labor. So it is a complicated equation, and it is something you have to figure out for your own space. But we could give some rough numbers there. Yeah. All right, Brandon, what do you think about adding fulvic and humic acid? I see Garage Grower got confused to humid. I see that one all the time. He is referring to humic acid. I know that's an autocorrect, so I'm not calling you out on that. I just want to point it out for folks who may try and Google search it later.
Yeah. So I like to add humic and fulvic to my beds every couple of rounds, a very small amount, maybe 2 tablespoons of one or the other to a 4x4 every 4 rounds. I mean, it's not something that's going to go anywhere. It can do some cool stuff in the soil as far as like chelating things. But some of the biology we add, like trichoderma, things like that, can do some chelating. Worms can create some chelating. I mostly use it primarily fulvic, and I primarily use it if I'm doing a foliar. That's when when I think about to grab some is when I'm doing a foliar and veg, and then every couple of rounds, I might add a tablespoon or 2, but not much.
So I want to give a little bit of more context here for folks who may not be familiar with fulvic and humic acid. So when we talk about organic matter in general, it's made up of, just about everything. We're made of organic matter. I'm looking around. Plants are made up of organic matter. Your shoes, organic matter. Everything. Most things are. If it's not inorganic, then it's organic matter. As that breaks down naturally through microbial process, mineralization, all of those things, Over time, it's going to turn into something called humus, which everyone has heard of. Humus is a very stable molecule, and technically the definition of humus is just it's organic matter that's been broken down so far that it's no longer distinguishable under a microscope at certain magnifications. So you can't tell if that was a dead rat or an old piece of bread. It's broken down that far. And essentially, humus is a much more stable form. And of that humus, there's fractions of it, some of which are humic acids and fulvic acids. The big difference between humic and fulvic acids is really just particle size. Humic acids are larger. They're good at chelating, which is a fancy word for bonding with minerals and helping making them plant available, turning them to an ionic form. Whereas fulvic acids are much smaller and actually allow for the assimilation of those minerals through the leaf tissue into the plant itself. Commercially produced humic and fulvic acid products, most, not all, are derived from leonardite, which is a mined mineral product. So again, you have to think that there is going to be some level of heavy metals in there. Again, it's low because of our application rates, but just something to be aware of. There's just like saying the word compost, it's varied across the board in terms of quality. Some are going to be very expensive. Some are going to be very cheap. Some are going to be high quality. Some are going to be very low quality, and your results can really vary. So I have yet to find a product that I'm like, this does everything I want it to do from a humic and fulvic perspective. But mostly I haven't found that product because it's not something I've actively really pursued or researched deeply. But there is a lot of good research around the benefits of these products. You can go on Google Scholar and just see there's tons of articles. So there is a lot of potential there. I don't want to discourage anyone that's interested in using them. And like you said, Brandon uses them. So that's just a little bit more about humic and fulvic products, just to share. All right, moving on. This is a comment for Brandon. For those of you that don't know, Brandon does some breeding and seed production, and these are some of the genetics that he shared.
Thank you. Keep me posted.
All right, let's see here. I'm catching up on comments. Brandon, can anyone tell me, should we top our plants or let it grow naturally?
So this is strangely controversial, and I can remember maybe, I don't know, it's been a minute now, like 10 years ago at I think it was an Emerald Cup, somebody gave a talk, and they brought in 2 dead plants that had been, everything had been removed except the stems. All the stems were left, and they had one plant that had been topped that was short, and they had this one single tall plant, and it was like people were literally fighting, like screaming at each other about how you should grow. And so if your goal is to grow as much good A grade, B grade bud as possible, and then it just comes down to how long do you want to take to fill up your canopy? Because Tad and I talk about this all the time. It doesn't matter if you fill up your canopy with 1 plant or 100 plants. 100 plants you can flip to flower tomorrow. 1 plant, it might take you 3 weeks to get it big enough to fill your bed, your 4x4, whatever the situation is. And so if you're doing Sea Green, and that's something that Michael Wolf Siegel, who's infamously from the Pacific Northwest, and sends me tips. He's the guy that invented that. He's the guy that, and so what they were trying to do is really dense planting counts and growing one single cola. I prefer to grow multiple colas for a couple of reasons. Primarily, I want to fill out my canopy fast, and I don't want to grow those big party colas that we used to love to grow and show off, because I know that those are just waiting to break your heart when you break them open and they've got some sort of fungal pathogen in there. And so I prefer to top plants. If I was growing hemp for fiber, I wouldn't top them. I would just grow everything as densely as I could in a outdoors in a field. but for cannabis flower, I top my plants.
Yeah. So the whole reason we top is if we have a plant. This is probably sadly the closest within reach plant I have, which is not the best example, but Brandon's begonia. If I were to top this plant, I'd be destroying the plant hormones, the auxins that are going to the root, the shoot tip here. And so then what it's going to do is it's going to push all these lateral branches and push more energy into there because it's just a dispersal of those hormones to the next available shoot tips. So the real question then becomes, do you want to grow a Christmas tree or do you want to grow a candelabra? Now, because our lights are flat and putting photons straight down, that candelabra approach, but used through topping and training, is going to give us a more even canopy. It's going to expose more buds to higher light intensity, higher PPFD, more evenly. So we're going to have a lot more of those A and B quality buds than we would if we just had one really tall bud and then smaller buds down below, because those lower buds are getting significantly less light. So I also agree with you. We should be topping plants for the most part. There are exceptions, but overall we want to be trellising and topping our plants.
Yeah. And if you're in like, if you gave me and Tad each the identical clones and said, go for it, and one of us grew and topped and one of us grew one cola, well, the person who topped is going to get a lot more weed than the one who didn't, at the end of the day, if you're growing one plant. And so these are planting strategies based on, how many plants you have, what plant counts you have to be concerned about, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I like to do it pretty early on in the plant's life too. Once we have good established roots and a few nodes, I think that's a great time to start topping, because then those other branches are only going to get more energy and become stronger. And then if you start to see one of these side branches is out competing one of the other ones, and we're still, we haven't flipped the flower yet, you could even top that one to get these other branches even more energy. So it's gonna vary a little bit based on your genetics and how hard you're pushing your plants through, fertigation and light intensity and CO2 and those sorts of things. But as a general rule, just think, how do I create that sort of even canopy? I want my plants to look like this, not like this. All right, Holy Toledo, we are working on East Coast options. We're putting 2026 is going to be all about that. So I appreciate you mentioning it. We've got some good stuff in the works. We're just not quite there yet. These things take a long time, because the last thing that I want to do is put out a product that doesn't well represent KiS Organics. I want to be able to say that the KiS Organics East Coast blend is just as good as what we're currently making here in Washington State. So unfortunately, that takes a long time. And the biggest problem with this, guys, is there's no freaking pumice on the East Coast. All you guys have is perlite. So realistically, if we came out with a mix on the East Coast, it would probably have to have perlite, because it just is not practical to ship pumice all the way across the country. I don't love perlite as much. I don't think it lasts quite as long in the soil. It floats to the surface. The advantage and the reason you see it on the East Coast is because all the pumice mines, for the most part, are on the West Coast of the country. And so perlite's a lot easier to ship because it's lighter. That's why it's essentially pumice that's been kiln dried and processed, and it's just frankly lighter and easier to ship. So we are actively working on this. I just wanted to bring that up, and I really appreciate the support. So
yeah.
All right, Rye 7410. Yes, Beneficial Insectary, great resource, good company. They have little pamphlets. BioBee has these little like Pokédex cards. I'm happy to share them with folks if anyone's interested as well. Both of those are great companies. The biggest thing, though, what Brandon was getting back to, is identification. Like, they're going to show thrips on there, but if it turns out I have echinothrips, their recommendation may not be optimal for what I'm actually dealing with. So it's complicated. The insect world is insane. Every time I think I know something, Suzanne just shoots me down 2 notches, because I learned that it's so much more complicated than soil science.
I've been working on the IPM series with Saul that we're going to release, and every single one of them, I'm just like, oh, well, I thought I understood this. Back to the
Yeah.
drawing board. Yep.
All right, Brandon, I'm going to let you take this one since you do the breeding stuff. Puff the Magic Grandpa asks, how do you guys pheno hunt? How small a container can be used if I use fish hydrolysate to supplement nutrition in this case?
So it depends. So like a proper pheno hunt, the more plants, the better. And so we're typically talking about, early filial generation. So, like do a F1 and you've got this big, pile of seeds, because a little bit of pollen goes a long way. And you want to do as large a sample as possible in the, in the quest for fire. We're looking for the best of what you like, and so it becomes very subjective, in a pheno hunt. We're looking for different things. We're looking for structure. We're looking for how long it takes to finish. We're looking for pathogen resistance. We're looking for terpenes. We're looking for all these different things. I really love what Tony over at Budulero says about, because those are the guys that have the pearls, which to me is just an unbelievably beautiful, crazy plant, just amazing. To a lot of people, it's probably really ugly in the way that hazes are ugly. And there's not many people aside from Tony that would have taken that ugly cultivar to finish. And so, just a note, because our, cannabis industry, the dispo world, wants purple, tight nugs, lots of trichomes, high THC. That's not what a lot of us are growing for at home. We're growing for good terps, and some of us are growing long flower, some of us are growing short flower, but we have different goals. You could easily grow in 4-inch pots using fish hydrolysate, and you could do 100 plants in a 4x4, single stalk, trim the bottoms out completely, and as soon as you can top them and take clones off of everything, obviously everything's got to be labeled very carefully. I've definitely, made mistakes in labeling that cost me, a lot of time and work. So be really careful about your labeling. But you could run, with fish hydrolysate, it's not going to be the best round you ever do, but as far as determining what you want to keep out of that sample size, that's a really easy way to do it.
I would say it'd probably be easier to go just slightly larger, even like a 1 gallon, if you have the space and are willing to do so, just because a 4 inch is so small. You'd have to really watch for root girdling, the plant becoming root bound. Like Brandon said, it's not going to be the best expression of those genetics. And this is a case where I think chemical nutrients may make sense for you on a small quick run, because organics is really hard as we get down to these really small containers. Fish hydrolysate is a little bit of a cheat code because it uses phosphoric acid, which is not technically an organic input anyway, even though it's allowed under NOP production. It's really just playing around with the regulations at that point. I would say, consider, if you're just trying to do a pheno hunt, that this is where mineral salts really shine, when you have a small amount of media and you're trying to grow a larger, healthier plant. If we're talking about growing for quality flower or being, the most sustainable grower possible, that's where organic shines. And that's why we do organic production. But I just want to acknowledge that is something that I would at least think about the pros and cons of when we talk about these really small containers.
Yeah, and the smaller the container, the more plants you can do, which that's what you want to do in a pheno hunt.
Yeah, and then you're going to have a much more balanced fertility with a mineral salt regimen in those really small containers.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult to do those small pots. I've been at this 4 decades, and it's not going to be the best run when I do that
with organics.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Holy Toledo, I just have to throw this up here and give you props. That is awesome. I love that people are reusing soil. I mean, this is the big reason that we push for living soil and why it is sustainable, because people can reuse that media so effectively. And I would argue you end up with a much better soil if it's properly managed, and you end up with better plant expression over time by reusing your media like this. So that's really awesome to hear. Okay, let me see. Oh, here we go. Organic Tendencies asks, how do you keep those ventilation socks clean between grows? Are they disposable? Yes. So they're very cheap. I think they're designed to be disposed of. I didn't really clean them between the two grows that I used them. And then this last grow, because I did under canopy lighting, I did not use them at all. The last grow that I used them in, I had zero pest pressure. So I wasn't, like, literally zero. I've never had a grow like this before where I hang a yellow sticky card and I come back, week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, and there's literally one, not even a fungus gnat, just some one bug that had gotten into the room. Like, they were so clean. I remember sharing with Brandon my my sticky cards, just shocked, because I've never had a grow that clean in my life. If I had really bad, like this last grow where I had really bad thrips, I'd probably be more inclined to clean them or toss them out. But they're just like kind of like a mylar. It's not mylar, plastic, kind of like I don't even know what type of plastic it is. Similar to like Ziploc bag, sort of a plastic thickness, mill size, and so you could probably dip it or clean it in something without damaging it, and then just let it dry out and then run them again.
I would use peroxide probably.
Yeah. Now, if you have an actual like duct socks product, which is not just the clear translucent ones that I had, those, yeah, you definitely want to clean those more, I think, because I think they're more likely to pick stuff up and last longer. Okay, let's see. Of course, the deadhead. I took humid acid before. Sorry, that made me chuckle.
Me too.
All right, lots of Christmas wishes. I love that.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, just catching up. Brandon, where is your genetics menu?
So you can email me, Brandon TAT@yahoo.com, and I'll send you the list. So it's just my name, Brandon TAT, like tattoo, because I'm covered in them head to toe. And BrandonTat@yahoo.com. I'd be very happy to send you a list. I think everybody knows that it looks like seeds are going to be going away legally here in about 10 years or 10 months. And so I don't know how that's going to play out. There's already some folks filing lawsuits and that kind of stuff. And I don't know if it's going to go back to like a cannabis culture model where you have to order them from a third party or what's going to happen. So we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, if you want seeds, please reach out. I'd be honored if you put something of mine in your garden.
Yeah, and I don't want to get political here at all. Even though I have strong political views, I just think it's better to keep this channel agnostic. That being said, keep in mind that Trump's signing an executive order is not the same as a law. These executive orders are not law, would have to go through Congress. So we'll see what happens with this actually does happen or not. But I think we have a long way to go to really find out what the implications are of these policy changes, if anything. We may just see, like we said, it may not change anything, but we may see a bigger crackdown federally on some of this stuff. So who knows? All right. Question, no-till 15 gallons. Can the carrier from a mycorrhizal inoculant build up over time, or is it minor enough not to worry about? I would say it's probably minor enough not to worry about, unless you're in a very, very strict regulated state. And we did see some low levels of lead in some of the carriers on these mycorrhizal products. Not enough that I would be concerned that, you're damaging your health, but maybe enough to add to your overall heavy metal load if you're tightly regulated in the state. But
Yeah, and
no,
keep in mind,
I wouldn't worry about it.
yeah, and mycorrhiza can help with the uptake of heavy metals. So
Speeds it up. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Scott comments, if I never grew it, so genetics from seed, I don't top it the first time. Some indica dominant don't need to be topped. Any thoughts on that, Brandon?
yeah, I mean, there are certain genetics that are kind of do a natural candelabra thing. That could be a hop latent symptom, so keep that in mind. But yeah, to each their own. I always top mine, but if that works well for you, that's great. If you look at your plant like this, and this bud right here, because it's the tallest, there's a hormone that tells the plant that this is the generative point. So like, where does the plant send all of its love? To the reproductive parts of the plant. And so this one's going to get more love than this bud is. And so the thought is, we want our, if you turn your hand over like this and the canopy's all empty or all even, each bud should be similar in size. As opposed to, if I grow it like this, I'm going to get this. This will be a really nice bud. This will be nice. This will be less. This will be less. And so I think in general, canopy management does help you regardless of the cultivar. But again, teach their own. If you're, if that's working, do it.
I will say I want to throw up these comments because, sorry guys, it takes me a while to catch up with the comment side. I don't top it. I use HST, so high stress training instead. Also in a 3x2x5 foot, I assume a tent or grow space, you don't really have a choice. Yeah, so high stress training is a great option. Little Nugs mentions it too, saying, is it better to just bend the plant instead of topping? So bending the plant will destroy, or pinching will destroy that hormone balance going to the plant, and it will redistribute it better, so you can still preserve that apical cola. But you don't necessarily need to do it that way. The reason I like the top is just because it is faster and it's easier. There's nothing wrong though with doing it through, high stress training, low stress training, pinching, bending. All of those things work equally well too. The one advantage to those options is you're not creating a wound on the plant, which is a potential place where pathogens or disease could get into the plant. So there is a benefit to doing it that way too. Yeah, that's good points. I like it when people bring up things that we forget to talk about as we're talking off the top of our head. So I really appreciate you guys bringing that up for folks who may not be familiar. Could you guys make a cloning tutorial video on YouTube? That's a good question. There's so many ways to clone, and everyone sort of has their favorite. Yeah, I mean, I think most people should be getting 95% with the majority of genetics, and I feel like most people have cloning figured out. If you have a specific cloning question, we can throw it in here. Yeah, we could probably do that eventually. It's more just time. It's not something that I'm like super excited to make a video on, if I'm honest, but yeah, we probably could.
Yeah, I've got to take a bunch
thoughts,
of clones I've got to take a bunch of clones this weekend, and so I could film some clones.
All right, there you go.
And like Tad said,
so
a bunch of different ways to do it, and how I would do it at home. Anything under 1,000, I do in domes. I just think it's easy. But anything above 1,000, I'm gonna do them differently. And then I know that there's people that like to use cloners, and those need to be in a humid room. And so, again, each thing has its own specific set of, environmentals and everything.
So Lil Nugs asks about lava rock. Green face plant comments that pumice is lava rock. Technically, it is. When I think of lava rock, though, I think of that black, porous, almost looks like, let's say, coral looking material to try and describe it. The issue I have with what garden centers call lava rock is it tends to be higher in heavy metals. The pumice is pretty clean as a source, at least the mines that we're sourcing from here in the Northwest. Um, so I do think you guys may have some lava rock over there. I'm not confident on that, but that's one of the reasons we haven't pivoted to that as a potential option. And it's heavy, just like pumice is. Um, Sand, unfortunately, is just too small. It doesn't give us the particle size we want to create the aerobic pockets in the soil. So it is challenging on the East Coast there.
Yeah,
Someone else asking.
there's slate,
Go ahead.
there's all kinds of things that you can find a clean source, but they're just heavy.
Yeah. Another cat house asked about Brandon's genetics. I think we covered that. If we didn't, you can always hit one of us up or through social media. We can get you that information. Happy to share that with you guys.
Just email
It's
me.
not through, just to be clear, that's not through KiS. I don't have any part of that. It's something Brandon does as a side gig, but happy to support it.
That's why I try to get people to go to my Yahoo, BrandonTad@yahoo.com. Just keep it completely separate from KiS.
Yeah. Arsenic in rice hulls. Yes, there can be. That's not to say all rice hulls are going to collect arsenic, but if you think about it, rice, just like cannabis, is a dynamic accumulator. It wants to pull up nutrients, and if that area where the rice is grown contains arsenic in the soil or lacks sufficient phosphorus, then it's more likely to pick up arsenic. And also, the way that rice is grown, because it's grown in bogs, essentially watered fields, the oxygen levels are very low, and the pH tends to be significantly lower, which means heavy metal uptake is going to be increased. For that reason, we choose to avoid rice hulls. Yes, you're going to get a little bit of silica from them, but there's a lot of other ways to get silica that I think are a lot better. And personally, as someone who's tried rice hulls, I find them to be very poor aerators because people add them as portion of the aeration. I wouldn't use it as more than 10% of your total aeration, if at all, if you really want to use them. Some people use them as a top dressing or mulch over their soil as a way to reduce fungus gnats or keep water from evaporating out. So that's another way that they're used. Personally, I just avoid them. I think there's better options out there than buying rice hulls. Also, if you are buying rice, one of the things that I read about, I can't remember where, was essentially that California rice was lower in heavy metals than some of the other international sources. So I would buy the rice that was grown in California. Just from an arsenic perspective, because I love rice. I don't know if it matters, but I just thought I'd share that. All right, looks like we're getting into curing again. I know we talked a little about this last Q&A. Brandon, do you want to just touch on this? And you can go back to last week's if you want to hear a much deeper discussion on this. And I will add, if you have a water activity meter, that is the most accurate way to dry your herb, but they're very expensive and they're just not practical for the average home grower, even a lot of commercial locations. So
yeah, just the impracticality of going around and touching each bud with a meter is just not, I mean, even for a home grower, that's just not practical. So the old 60-60 rule, like a lot of things in cultivation, are guardrails. And so like 60-60 works really well for a lot of people, and especially for home growers. I prefer to dry. I prefer to be a little colder and a little drier. I look at dry cure, obviously it's two different things, the dry and and I'm trying to do my dry. I just saw some research from Dr. Bruce Bugbee, and I think it was Allison Justice, Dr. Justice, but they had done some studies and they were finding that if you could get your dry period to be like a 10 to 14 day range, that was the range that was best for preserving the optimal number of terpenes, the most terpenes. And so
secondary metabolite.
so going too slow, things start to oxidize and you could run into pathogens and all kinds of stuff. And then going too fast, you're volatilizing some of these secondary metabolites. And so that 10 to 14 day window for a dry cure, I do mine around 50 degrees and 45% relative humidity. I'm able to do that. A lot of people can't, like I'm just, in a special environment where it's easy to do that. That's a lot of electric and a lot of infrastructure for a lot of people to do, and I don't need out here. And so get as close as you can. And because somebody in one of these many lives, somebody made a great comment, and they were like, well, you've smoked plenty of 80/60 too, and they were right. And we enjoyed that. And so yes, we do want to try to optimize this, so get as close as you can. And everybody's environment's a little bit different. Like when I was in South Carolina, some of my friends went out to Colorado to help a friend, and they lost the whole harvest essentially because they were from South Carolina and they were used to, it took like 2 weeks minimum with the dehues running and as cold a room as you could get to the dry phase. And brutal dry Colorado winter, they left the plants for 2 days, came back to take a look at them, and everything was crispy, just toothpicks. And so they fried the whole grow. So every environment's different, and you want to just get as close as you can.
Yeah, there is research that shows you want to get as much water as you can out of the buds initially in the first 28, 48 hours, and then you want to settle into a more homogenized of dispersion of that over the next couple of weeks as part of that process. So it's not something that I think we have all the data on yet, but I think we're learning. And you can see in the comments, people have slightly different takes on it, but they're all within the same range. All right, let's see. Holy Toledo asks, what is an amendment that you can use in living soil that will help in veg that a lot of people overlook, but is a game changer? I have a couple of favorites. Brandon, do you have anything you want to throw out there?
Are we talking just NPK or other things? I mean, NPK, I think the thing that every grower should be using is a non-essential. It's silica. AgCell 16 is the way I like to do it. I also add Wolastanite to my beds. We can talk about that, and we've talked about that before. But so I think that's on the NPK side. That's the one I would do. And then as far as like biology, I'm a huge fan of trichoderma and Bovaria, just to keep my soil free of pests and pathogens to the best of my ability.
So I did a long format video. I think I want to break it down and do shorter 2-3 minute highlights of all the different organic amendments. But if you want to go on our website, or not on our website, on the YouTube channel, which you guys are watching on now, you can see that video. It's over an hour long of me talking about every single amendment just off the top of my head. But I've been doing this long enough, I can cover them pretty well. If I think about my favorites, the first things that came to mind, and egg cell was one of them, or Wolastanite. So thinking about silica, how do we protect our plant, give it better resistance to disease and drought and heat and all of these things. That's important in veg. The other things I thought of was calcium. So like gypsum is one of those things that I think every soil mix, every grower should have in their pantry. It's affordable, it's effective, it's not going to mess up your pH. It's going to release calcium at a really good rate and keep your plant healthy. So that was probably the biggest one. The other ones that I really like is insect frass. Insect frass is sort of like your general fertilizer. It's going to give you NP and K. It's going to give you microbes. It's going to give you some chitin, probably some silica in there. It's very clean from a heavy metal perspective. All the insect frass I've seen has been very clean. So that's probably the best general fertilizer. If I had to pick just one NPK product that was organic that I could only use one, that would be it. The other one that I really like, and I always put in all my grows, is alfalfa meal, organic alfalfa meal. Alfalfa is just such a good microbial food. You're going to get a little bit of N and K, not a lot, but it's going to feed the microbes, which are then going to help cycle the nutrients for your plant. You don't need to put in a lot, but those are probably my three favorites. So every time I recycle my soil, there's going to be a little bit of probably all three of those, but definitely the gypsum and definitely the alfalfa in my mix. So
Yeah, and those are two things that I recommend in every single soil report, like every single one.
all right, I don't know if I can answer this. Little Nug says, "Why is my most terpiest flower I've ever grown was when I used my bokashi waste 2.5 gallon worth and buried it in my 2x2 bed." So
These are open systems like this. Yeah. Good luck.
it could be something from the bokashi. It could have been a microbe in there. It could have just been random coincidence. It could have been something else with the way you watered. It could have been that bokashi stressed the hell out of your plant, which caused it to produce more secondary metabolites, which created more terpenes as a self-defense mechanism. Who knows? That's a great question. I don't have an answer. It could have been good. It could have been bad. Both of those things can produce terpenes. Yeah, good question though.
Yeah, but that's why you keep a notebook so that you can keep everything the same every round. You only flip one toggle, so that you can see what the effect is and if it is a direct effect. So, yeah, repeat the experiment and let us know.
Could my bokashi feed waste feed your SF nematodes? I don't know. Not that I'm aware of. I feel like I would have heard of that if I was
Yeah. The SF nematodes are going to target an organism, arthropod.
Let's see. What type of genetics are you talking about, Brandon?
Shoot me an email.
All right.
I see Puff the Magic Grandpa got some Bodhi seeds. I got green Bodhi laced me up with a bunch of just absolute fire right now. Yeah, unreal.
Thank you, Ascending Tom. Okay, that was not something I was aware of. Thank you for sharing that. Got it. So it's separate from the Schedule 3, the executive order. Okay. Good point. Thank you.
The door for big pharma and Greece's easy banking for big money investors. It's not going to do anything for a home grower. And then the hemp bill could, they've just kind of moved the loophole from seeds over to clones, as far as I can tell.
I will say I know a lot of people who grow commercially, like Cleo over at Paradise Organics was saying he couldn't get a mortgage because he's a head cultivator at a facility and his name's tied to cannabis. I've gotten denied mortgages and loans and stuff because of, if you Google my name, you guys can guess at what would come up. Even though I'm not actively, technically, growing cannabis other than medically. So in that sense, I do think the banking needs some fixing. I think it would help a lot of people, but I do agree the move was not made probably most likely to help the majority of people like myself or Cleo. It was really for these larger institutions. Yeah, you mentioned this comment. Bodhi's a good dude. Everyone loves his genetics for a reason. So that's awesome. Congratulations. I hope you get some winners in there that you really get to enjoy.
Yeah. And Puff, let me know, shoot me an email. Let me know what you got from him. Cause I've got his sour best shit ever. I've got a ton of just absolute fire from him.
Expanded shale is another option. It's not as light as pumice. Pumice is not light, so I can't even imagine. I haven't played around with it. I will have to look into that. But if it's heavier than pumice, that's pretty brutal. Okay, let's see here. Yep. Okay, so here's the video. If folks want to dive into her work, yes. Thank you, Ascending Tom, for your good comments here. You guys could look this up. She did put this out through the Cannabis Coalition, something I think they're calling it. Yeah, worth checking out for folks that want to learn more about that. All right. Oh yeah, biochar, another good one I forgot to mention. Um, let's see here. In an earth box, besides the clench test, I assume that's what you mean when you take a handful of soil and squeeze it and see how much moisture is. I've never heard of that term, but that's the only thing I can think of. Is there a target soil density that can come from a soil test?
Not from a soil test.
Well,
Compost.
The Logan test will show bulk density of a soil mix, but we don't typically use that metric because we know the media that we're working with already. So I've never looked closely at that. Do you know?
Yeah, because yeah, I thought a clinch test. I was thinking squeeze test like for moisture. Um,
Yeah, me too.
so yeah, this is just something I'm not. So soil density is a different conversation, obviously, and in substrates, I don't really worry about it. It's not, outside in situ. If I'm in clay, and that's something I pay attention to. But in the inside in a earth box or a bed, I just it really wouldn't be on my radar as a toggle to be adjusting because
Yeah, I'm not sure
I've
I
already
know the
got the
answer to
tilth
this.
that I want. You know,
Yeah, we usually try to get the physical properties right first, but again, I don't know that it makes a difference so much earth box versus
yeah.
other ways of growing. I think the media can be pretty similar there. Can I use vinegar to adjust the pH of egg still? I mean, I wouldn't. Um, do you have some other suggestions, Brandon?
Okay, so potassium silicate is highly reactive, and salt growers are really aware of that because if you try to add potassium silicate to any sort of reservoir that's got anything in it, it immediately clouds out and precipitates out. And so, if you, so when you're saying adjusting the pH, first I want to make sure that people are not trying to adjust the pH of their concentrate because if you do that, you might as well flush that
Hmm.
down the toilet. It's going to lock out. So you don't want to adjust the concentrate. I've had a couple of growers reach out to me about how to adjust that. So don't do that. The mantra to repeat with potassium silicate is dilute, dilute, dilute. And so once you've added, you've made your concentrate, it's like 560 grams per gallon, I think. And then always add half the water first, all the powder, dissolve it, then add the rest of the water. Then you can feed at half to 1 teaspoon per gallon. And I do
Of
that
the
weekly
concentrate.
of the concentrate. I do that weekly. So I'll add that into my reservoir. And so that's got a pH of like 12, but I've got either a 50 or 100 gallon reservoir. And so I'm usually dealing with a pH around 9. And I'll just add, citric acid's the organic acid, but it's a weak acid. So it doesn't buffer particularly well. And it's not going to maintain and hold that pH particularly well, over a couple of days or anything. I prefer phosphoric acid. It's a lot safer, less caustic than sulfuric, and it gives you a free available, well, not free, you paid for the acid, but you're getting available phosphorus using that, which, that's the hardest element for us to liberate in organics. And so any chance I get to cheat and do that, I do it.
Could you use just a little bit of fish hydrolysate since that contains phosphoric acid, like the CFOS product, for example, Brandon?
I don't know because I'm sure a lot of people have noticed this. Um, when you have a res, even with lower alkalinity, there's there's something about fish hydrolysate that always seems to take a lot of acid or base to move it. Obviously we're trying to use base usually with fish hydrolysate to bring it up, but it always seems like it takes a lot. And it was the same in South Carolina. It's the same here. It's less
Hmm.
with RO, but it's a weird thing. And I don't have any data on it, so I can't really speak definitively to it. But I just don't think it would be enough. I just don't think it would move you enough. But if somebody tries it, let me know. I'll try it. Shit, I'll try it this weekend. We'll see what happens.
When I've used Excel in the past, I've just watered in at the higher pH and haven't really worried too much about it, and it's been okay. I realize that might not be optimal, but as a home grower, um, sometimes we make sacrifices. I have a hunch that it would probably be all right if if you're only adding a half a teaspoon per gallon of water of the concentrate, and your water has a little bit of minerals in it already. It's probably not going to be a huge issue if it's a little bit more alkaline with that one watering. But just throwing that out there. Brandon, I can tell you're like, no.
So we had a really interesting conversation earlier this week as well, and it wasn't about pH, but it was about hidden hungers and essentially energy exchange. And so somebody had really high chlorides, and that was creating a kind of a hidden hunger situation that was creating a gradient that it was hard for uptake to occur, and it was contributing to a lower harvest. And so pH can create a similar thing where, your plant has X amount of energy for the day, and it could put that energy towards adjusting pH or stacking flowers. And so, yes, organics, we can get away with a lot. We've got this huge buffer of organic material, and we've got a huge volume of soil. And so we can get away with a lot. And so you don't have to pH everything that goes into your beds. Do I? I do, because it's optimal, but you don't have to, and you can grow some really nice plants without it.
Yeah, I guess that's my thing is like water in general, especially low alkalinity water, has pretty small impact on overall soil pH. So yes, if it was a commercial facility and we were trying to optimize everything perfectly, I would agree with you. We need to pH everything. This to me is kind of like low hanging fruit. Like if I'm busy and I just need to get some exhale out there, I'm not going to stay up all night worried about it.
Somebody literally just sent me a text and said that they tried it and it doesn't do anything, that they've done it before. They've tried to use fish hydrolysate to move the pH. Somebody just sent me a text.
Huh. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. I love that people are tuning in.
Yeah.
All right. I just saw the time. We've been going on. Wow. Okay. Lost track of time. All right. We'll start winding this up, but I do see a few more questions. Little nugs to answer this though. Seed probably would not sprout in insect frass. It doesn't have the same physical properties as worm castings. The NPK is going to be too high. It's usually think of it more like a fertilizer or a fine powder. It's just not going to create the optimal physical properties that you would want for seeds to sprout. I see Gabby in here. Hey, Gabby, man, good to see you. We got to connect on some stuff here soon. Let's see.
Yeah, if you guys have time, we talked about that. If you guys have time over the Christmas break and you're looking for a podcast, go check out Gabby's Craft Grower Network on YouTube. Those are my favorite interviews.
All right, little nugs. I just want to throw this here. I think this is a really thing. If people are not familiar with Liebig's Law of the Minimum, I think it's a really important philosophy for understanding how you grow. So basically this idea of the law of the minimum is there's always some minimum factor that's going to limit your plant growth. The example is typically used as like a bucket with a whole bunch of different holes in it, and you're trying to fill those holes. And you could say, one is light and one is water and one is humidity in relation to temperature, one is fertility. And so there's always going to be something in this that's going to be your minimum, what's limiting your plant's optimal health and growth. And so you just want to start working your way through that list. And so I always start with the big ones like light, airflow, media, fertility, watering. Those are the big ones to me, temperature and humidity, obviously. And once all of those things are figured out, then we can start dialing in, little tweaks on fertility and biology and
trace elements,
playing around with under canopy airflow, micronutrients, all of these things. But where I find people get in trouble is you get down, and I'm not picking on the soul food web, but it was just the first thing that popped in my head is people get so focused on one aspect, the biology, that they miss all these other big ones that are way more important and act like biology is the most important limiting factor, when in reality, I think it's pretty far down the list relative to these other things. We could give the plant, perfect biology, but if there's no CO2 in the air, or they're not getting sufficient light, it's not going to grow. So it's just a great philosophy. I'm glad you brought it up. It's a great thing to end the show on. Go look up Liebig's Law of the Minimum. Maybe we talk about it next live. And everyone have a wonderful Christmas, Hanukkah, Festivus, Kwanzaa. I don't know what other holidays are happening this time of year, but I hope people have a nice time with family. So
happy holidays.